Today on the Zen Perry Project, we have Brant Bjork, an icon of the California desert rock scene, a very hard person to introduce because he's played with so many guests. Bjork Trio, Stöner, Low Desert Punk Band, Che, Fu Manchu, Fatso Jetson, Bjork and the Bros, Daycon, Mondo Generator, Vista Chino, Desert Sessions, and of course, he's the founder of Caius. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's just jump right into it. So set the scene. What is the contrast of the music scene in the desert now from when you cut your teeth back in the 80s with the band today at 13 years old?
Well, back in the day in the late 80s, I mean, that was a specific time and place. And I mean, there's just the general obvious of how the world is just it's a different place now. It's a different world, and I don't know if I could even imagine what a 13-year-old kid here in the desert is attempting to go through in terms of being creative and starting a band or contributing to some kind of scene. I don't know, but for me, I mean, and some of my peers, we just were out here in the middle of nowhere, and we discovered punk rock, and we literally took to the DIY spirit of the American hardcore movement, because it was motivating and liberating at the same time. It gave us the idea that we could actually start bands and play music with no motive other than just being creative and expressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess some of those first bands for you, Ramones and the Misfits, what did that kind of mean to you? How did you kind of come across these bands, and what were your first sort of like inklings into getting into punk music back in the day? Who introduced you?
Well, it's always the trickle down effect. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood that was all kids, and a lot of older, what I call the older kids, a lot of older guys. And so it was just the trickle down effect. They turned me on as a kid to like Kiss and Queen, and then I discovered, I saw Rock and Roll High School on TV one afternoon, and I just loved this band, the Ramones. I thought they were a fake band. I didn't even know they were real. And I discovered that they were real, and I started buying their records. And then my neighbor next door, Mark Tavel, he was about 5 years older than me. He saw that I was getting into the Ramones, and so he turned me on to, Black Flag and GBH, and then my cousin Darren, who was older than me, turned me on to the Sex Pistols and Generation X. And so it just was like, it all kind of happened like really quick. And it was a whirlwind. And that's what a movement is. It just kind of, it's moving, and it's moving. Sometimes it's moving pretty quick.
What made you think the Ramones weren't a real band when you saw them?
Well, because it was a commercial movie. It was like a full on movie. And I was a little kid. I was very impressionable. I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And it just seemed too fantastic to be real. My idea of a rock band at that time was like Kiss and Queen and these bands that were just grandiose and otherworldly and beyond. And the Ramones looked like the guys in my neighborhood with leather jackets, and they were playing music that sounded like the oldies that my parents listened to. And so it was like a too good to be true scenario. And what a amazing thing for me when I discovered they were real. It was kind of like life changing. I was like, oh my God.
Like, this is a real thing I can actually listen to, go buy an album of. Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think an isolated music scene is kind of even possible, like something you saw back in the desert in those days? Do you think that's something that we can even look for right now, or do you think the internet has kind of blown that whole idea up?
I think anything's possible, and I think if there's going to be any kind of future movement, it's going to involve people that deliberately isolate themselves for that exact reason. But isolation is definitely, I mean, it's clearly a huge element to what we were doing out here. I mean, of course, there was a DIY movement that we took from Black Flag, which was kind of like our father band because they're just right, right up the highway in LA. And they used to actually come out here and play in the desert. And so Black Flag, single-handedly probably lit the spark of our DIY um, motivation. But we built it in an entirely different way because we're out here in the middle of the desert and we are isolated. And you had, other scenes like San Francisco or the Midwest or like, DC, and they all had their network and their DIY, ethic. But again, as I said, I mean, this was in the, 80s where you didn't have, it wasn't the digital age yet. And so the grassroots of a movement was all built upon word of mouth, independent records, fanzines, even skateboarding was a big part of it. Thrasher magazine was definitely a big deal. But like now, I mean, yeah, it's an entirely different world, and there's just gonna be entirely different ways in which people get a collective consciousness of creativity going. And you know, it's I don't know, it's trippy.
What is you kind of talked about isolation. What is your kind of roadmap for isolating as an artist and kind of staying true to yourself, or just in general making the music that actually you want to make rather than trying to like parrot other people's music? What is isolation to you and why is it so important?
Well, I think you just said it. I mean, I make the music that I want to hear. I make the records that I want to hear. And that might sound really selfish, but I mean, I'm an artist. I might be entertaining from time to time, but I don't think of myself as an entertainer. I'm not going out juggling. I'm 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 an artist, and I'm an artist because as a young person, I was creative and I was dysfunctional and I was upset and frustrated, like a lot of young kids, and music was my outlet. It was my healing source, and I allow myself to just create so I can heal and progress and feel better, and if I'm able to inspire and even entertain people along the way, that's just an added bonus. So I mean, as far as being true, I mean, if if there if there is any kind of integral definition of what it is that I do, it's that yeah, it's just that I do what I need to do to keep myself doing it.
Yeah. I So Michael and I we were from San Diego. We'd always go take my Jeep out to the desert. We'd go listen to your records back when we were teenagers and just kind of soak that all in. And that it's such an integral part of the desert and the scene. And for me, and every time I listen to your music, it's something that just means something more to us than the sum of its parts, you know. What do you think is like the primary difference between like the desert and any other scene? For people who don't know, like what is a generator party in the desert?
Well, the desert where we are from, the Coachella Valley Desert. There's lots of deserts, of course, but we're lazy and we always refer to our desert as the desert. But we're in the Coachella Valley Desert, and you know, um, a generator party is the result of us not having any kind of formal central location or place from which to build a scene. We didn't have a venue. We didn't have uh, a club or even like a. I mean, there was a skateboard shop that opened up in Palm Springs in the late '70s and called Bates Skates. And Mike Bates was like one of the first OG skateboarding punk rockers in the low desert. And he opened up his shop. And through that shop, what would be the entire desert punk rock independent scene came from that shop. And people like Sean Wheeler and John Summers and Mario Lally and Alfredo Hernandez, these guys were all coming from this shop. It was all about skateboarding, and then skateboarding turning into like punk rock. And as bands started to get formed and people started to like, you know, become aware and start getting more and more involved and excited about having an actual punk rock scene in the desert, there's nowhere to play. I mean, there's house parties and stuff, but so around 84, Mario Lally got the idea to just say, well, house parties are always getting broken up. Um, there's no proper musical venue. We didn't have like a Boohoo Gardens or a CBGB's or a Cuckoo's Nest. We didn't have anything like that in the desert. But we had raw desert, and we figured if we had a generator, we could go out as far as we can and avoid authority and just throw parties and play. And that's what we did. And we didn't think it was too special at the time. In fact, if anything, we were a little frustrated that that's what we had to do. But we made the best of it, and it got pretty, it was pretty insane. Looking back, it was pretty insane.
Yeah, like how so? What were your sort of first generator parties that you can remember, or anything that stick out to you?
Well, I mean, I remember them all. I mean, um, I used to go see Yawning Man quite a bit. I'd go see them every weekend, and they were a mellow kind of like zony desert rock band. I kind of consider them the first band to actually sound like the desert. But I'd go see John Summers punk bands and Unsound, and of course I was out there playing with Caius, and I was in a band called Today before Caius, and we'd go out there and play, and it's just it'd just be like out in the middle of the desert. There'd be sometimes it'd be only 50 people, sometimes it'd be 150 people, sometimes everyone there you knew and liked. Sometimes there's cross pollination of like tribals, like a lot of people from Palm Springs and India, and they don't always get along, and there it could be really aggressive, territorial pissings. It could be violent. There could be like the generator breaks down. It could get cold and windy. I mean, it was like you're dealing with the elements, the natural elements, and the social elements, and there's no security. So like when shit hits the fan, it's gonna get on you. It sucks. But at the same time, it was exhilarating, and it was our thing.
There you go. Yeah, we just wanted you to just paint the picture of the desert for us, and thanks for doing that. Let's move on to some more maybe fun, lighthearted stuff. If you had the chance to smoke a joint with an alien who just got to Earth, and you had to show them a few albums, what would you pick?
Uh, well, I'd play "Are You Experienced" by Jimi Hendrix and probably "Disraeli Gears" by Cream.
Yeah, those are your picks. That was quick. That was a quick answer.
Well, they're like my two favorite rock records of all time.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure you have those probably in mass, maybe if not a couple copies. Um, so what? So for song crafting, I know this is something that you talk about a lot, um, and have looked into a lot. So you've mentioned the Ramones and Misfits. We talked about that, but what do you look for when you were first kind of studying music and getting into writing music with bands, whether as a drummer or as your own experience? Like, what do you look for in a well-crafted song?
Well, a well-crafted song is just that. It's just a crafted song. I mean, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it tells a story. And I'm not suggesting that's what has to be in order for a song to be great. Um, there's a lot of music that are, you know, involve a lot of improvisational elements or are strictly avoiding structure. and they can be um, equally as inspiring and effective. Um, but I happen to, and even though I thrive on and kind of cut my teeth as a musician and involved in improvisational elements, which I love. I always like that as a departure away from a song that is well crafted. And that's just me being a young listener. And uh, I just was attracted to quick, quick shots of pop, you know, genius. And whether it's TV themes from the 70s or, you know, I mean, the Ramones, that's exactly what they were doing. They were like a creative response to all the like hits of the like late 50s and early 60s. And you know, and the Misfits were just kind of riding the Ramones coattails and did the same thing. They were crafting really great little pop ditties. and and it's you know, it sounds easy, and that's the point. I mean, the Beach Boys sound like, you know, any 4 or 5 kids from the California coast at that time could do it. But that's the whole point. It's really deceptive because you're in the bliss of and you're being entertained. But it's not easy. It's not easy to do, and I like the challenge of of and the practice of just crafting songs. You know, the Beatles obviously are the masters, but any great rock band, you know, everyone loves Black Sabbath, and everyone loves Led Zeppelin, of course, and certainly in my area where I'm involved, my community of rock musicians, they're like the Godfathers, right? Well, it's like, yeah, but they had great songs. I mean, you know, War Pigs is a great song, and it's a very well crafted song. And Zeppelin was even more aware of like crafting well well arranged songs, and you know, I just that's what I like.
What do you when you're writing a song, what do you kind of go for first? Is it music? Is it lyrics? Is it just a jam with somebody? Is it just some idea you get when you're driving around? What kind of comes to you first usually, or is it some combination of all of those things?
No, I don't have a particular method. Usually, it's just it could be anything. It could be a feeling that I want to convey. Um, what's the message? What's the message here? Um, you know, um, and it could start with a lyric, uh, a phrase, a bass line. Um, it's always good to sometimes start with a rhythm or like a particular beat, like what, you know, you want to get. It's, you know, once you get people's feet moving and get them grooving, then you could start instilling ideas in their head. So starting with a rhythm is always effective, but I don't have a particular formal method.
Yeah. I like the idea of getting people moving first, and I mean, or especially yourself. You know, if you're into it, it's going to be a lot easier to write on top of that. I'm sure. Um,
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, if it doesn't move me, I won't bother. You know?
absolutely. Before you started your solo project, you teamed up with Fu Manchu, even producing their first album. Your drumming on those albums is insane. It's legendary. It's so to the point. It's so perfect, and it's just what the band needed. Um, as a drummer, I just got to ask, what were you playing at the time for your drum sets? Like what was the idea of like getting into Fu Manchu, kind of getting out of your typical initial desert scene days? What was that whole process like, uh, joining that band?
Well, I had met through through a friend in high school. Um, she had an older brother that lived with her mom in her father in San Clemente. And we went out there to party one time, and because her brother was going to have this house party, and then the next day we were going to drive to Tijuana and see HR or the Bad Brains or something. I can't remember. And she said, "You're going to really like my brother, yada, yada. He's in a band. He's cool." And I met him and he was cool and he was in a band. And I played him a cassette of some Kai's and he played me a cassette of his band. And then after hearing Kai's, he said, "You know what? You'd probably like my friend's band more. And he's going to come to the party tonight." And his friend was Ruben Romano, the original drummer for Fu Manchu. So I was still in high school and Ruben and I hit it off instantly that night. And we stayed in touch and we started sending each other our music and our new music. And then that led to like me, them coming to LA to see us perform and me going down to Orange County to see them perform. And then we started doing shows together. And then I brought them out to the desert. And so they kind of ended up being like a brother band to Caius. And then I had my manager, Catherine Innie, for Caius. I said, "You got to check out my friend's band, Fu Manchu." And she did. And she ended up managing them. And we just became like brother bands. And unfortunately, as it happens, Scott and Ruben parted. And I had been out of Caius for about a year. And Scott called me and said, "Ruben and I parted, and I want you to play drums." And I said, "Well, okay." And so I got my old Ludwig kit out of the garage and dusted it off and started playing with Fu Manchu.
There you go. As simple as that. You seem like you really connected a lot of people back in the day. Or I mean, I'm sure even now. That's I mean, you've worked with so like at the top of the intro when I just kept on listing names, you're definitely like very influential in the scene. Um but I would appear that people just like hanging out with you in general. You seem to be a very, relaxed, chill person, but you're extremely prolific. Do you ever consider yourself just a super prolific, like type A go-getter sort of person?
Well, I mean, I get shit done, and it's because shit has to get done. And I don't wait for other people to tell me to do it, you know? But I think the most important part is that um, it's my life force. It's what I do. And I'm not quite as much as a go-getter as I was 20 years ago. I mean, um, I'm starting to kind of downshift. But it's, again, as I said at the top, it's a time and a place. And when it's time to move, you got to move. And I did do a lot of networking. I did make a lot of connections, but back then that was necessary, and that was all part of it. Again, it all comes from the DIY education. I mean, that's what I think when it comes to the scene of music that I might be recognized with, especially a lot of the younger people getting into it. They might not understand that. Maybe they do. I don't know. But like Caius and Fu Manchu, and then we got turned on to Monster Magnet, and all the other bands that we all came from a hardcore background. Everybody did. Even bands like the Melvins and Soundgarden and Nirvana. Um, all we were all coming from a DIY um, hardcore background. And even though there was this slew of bands due to the Seattle movement that got signed to major labels, um, the what would become the stoner rock scene were like kind of like these bands that weren't from Seattle, and but were playing, kind of pulling from a similar um, well, if you will. Um, we had kind of, Minor Threat is awesome, and we love DOA, but we're going to roll a joint and listen to Funkadelic and Black Sabbath now, you know, and still go get ourselves gigs and still hump our gear and figure out how to put records out and build an audience from the ground up. You know, it's all relevant.
Yeah. Did you ever think this is going to happen to you? At what point in your life did you think I want to be a musician, or did you ever think that you would tour the world or be in bands, get to be in cool recording studios? Was there ever a point in your life where you're like, this is what I want to do and I
Oh
expect?
yeah, there was absolutely a point in my life, and that was in 1996 when I was working for my friend's dad, Roger Johnson's construction, and I was swinging a sledgehammer in 110-degree heat during July. And that's when Scott called me and said, "Do you want to join Fu Manchu?" And I said, "Fuck yeah." And I said, "You know what? I went the whole time I was in Caius. I had no plans of being a professional musician. I didn't even consider myself a musician then. I was a punk kid that was like drinking beer and smoking dope and playing the drums and rocking out. I thought we had one shot at making a couple records, and that's what we did. I didn't see beyond Thursday. It wasn't until I thought, I don't want to work construction, and with Fu Manchu, maybe we could together do something that we could build ourselves a living. And I don't need much, but if I can cover my bills, that would be pretty awesome to play drums and make records and tour doing that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I didn't see past Thursday. That's a good way of looking at it, because I think people think too long term when they're starting stuff in general. They're like, yeah, how can I make my music make money like within the next 6 months or whatever? And that's just probably not the way to go about it in general. Um,
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Everyone's got their own trip. Yeah, I don't know, man.
there you go. What did you learn from Scott Hill? Like what was kind of instilled in you, or that friendship that you guys had? What did you learn about him from being a band leader for your solo project after that?
Scott's the best band leader I know, and I learned a lot from Scott. He's very smart. He's very humble. He leads from behind, and he's very fair. He's very wise, and I think he's overall a bit underrated as a rock force. Um, but to me, he's a total captain and someone that I was very grateful to play for and with. We became partners and we were very close and we worked very well together. And it was a sad day when I left Fu Manchu, but I knew I had to. I had done all I could with other bands, and I knew it was time for me to embark on my own adventure. And when I did, I took a lot of what I learned from Scott Hill to become a band leader and you know um, and build my own foundation from which to build, you know well, what would be ultimately become a solo career. I mean, the Fu Manchu's longevity doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, Scott, it doesn't. I would have bet on Scott, no problem, back in the day. So, but you know, he just taught me to, yeah, that I just picked up a lot from him. You know.
Anything in specific that kind of sticks out to you that maybe some other people can learn a little bit about?
Well, I mean, I don't want to go too deep into it because it might not be something Scott is. He's not the most social guy in the world, and I respect that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think and I don't. It's certainly not something Scott invented or anything. But I mean, I was always an advocate of, like, if you're in a rock band, equality is a pretty good foundation from which to get everyone involved and be committed and loyal to the cause. And as soon as someone wants more for whatever reason, that disharmony is going to probably pollute the band, and you're not going to have a rad rock band for very long, which is what I experienced in Caius. And he not only saw and understood my perspective, but he'd already been working that way because he's wise and he knows. Like, if you're going to build something for longevity, everyone's got to be taken care of. Everyone's got to be important. Everyone's got to be respected. And you know, that's rule number one.
That's a good rule to live by. You know, we're in this together. It's kind of, it's like it's a band. That's what it's called. You know, it's a band of people.
That's
Uh,
right.
So I mean, I have a question, but I feel like something following this up. It's like it almost feels like you have like a undercurrent of like what you kind of think your life is going towards. Like you're following something in your life because you've had certain, you know, rubs or things happen in your musical career, but they've always kind of turned out somewhat in your favor. You know, your solo career, people absolutely love it. You know, people are fanatics of you. But what do you think you're kind of following in this? Like, what does your gut tell you about working with certain people, not working with certain people? How do you go about this, and what caused you to go into your solo career and make your first album, Halamanta?
Well, um, I went into my solo career, as I said before, because I was writing a lot of music and songs while I was in Fu Manchu. I was writing a lot of the songs when I was in Caius, and I was doing that from the position of a drummer. And I played guitar as well. Um, and I knew there was music in me that needed to come out, um, but it wasn't music that I felt was appropriate for a band like Fu Manchu. And even in Caius, I felt like the music was never a problem, but internally there were power struggles that that made individuals' ability to be creative um, strapped and kind of, it was like a creative oppression. So those two experiences left me, you know, in 1999 saying, you know what, I got to at least just make a record, which is what I did. I made Alamanta, and only reason why I played all the instruments is because I just didn't have time or money to get some other guys together. So I just did everything myself, and it felt really good. It felt really good to release all that creativity, and the result of that was me. You know, I had all these funky names for this record that I had made, and my girlfriend at the time was like, "Well, why aren't you just calling it Brant Bjork? I mean, you played everything; it's all your music. Why?" She couldn't understand the logic of not wanting to call it Brant Bjork, and I couldn't argue with her. I was like, "Oh God, it just never crossed my mind to be a solo artist or put out a record under my own name." And she just said, "That's ridiculous. Like it'd be ridiculous not to." And I couldn't argue with that, so I just went under my own name, and the result was me saying, "You know what? I this might be a bad career move because Fu Manchu was doing well, and and I thought, but this might this might be the time for me to take the, you know, the road not traveled, and which is me doing my own thing." And I said, you know, I said, you know, if I'm going to tell my own story, I got to tell my own story. I can't keep expecting these other guys to express my feelings. I need to do it myself. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know if I was going to play the drums or play bass or play guitar or sing. I didn't know how to sing. So my whole solo career is from beginning till now is the sound of a guy on a musical adventure, figuring out how to do shit as he goes, figuring out how to make records, figuring out how to learning how to play the guitar, learning how to sing, being experimental. That's, I mean, I didn't wait till I was super rad before I came out and said, all right, guys, everyone get ready. Here comes something really cool. I just started doing it and put it out. And that's probably, it's probably, you know, to answer your second question or your first question, I don't know. I don't know if I have any kind of um, um, I mean, I'm not. I'm clearly not a master businessman. if I if I was, I'd be a multimillionaire by now. But the money was never what it was about to me. As I said, I'm an artist. I live the lifestyle of an artist, and I just follow my heart. And my philosophy really is just like um, I'm not in pursuit of perfection. In fact, I don't even need or want perfection. If it's good, I'll take it. And and every once in a while, you might think, I mean, what's great? People determine what's great. I don't know, but I'm not reaching for the stars. I'm just kind of like I'm just chipping away, as I say.
Damn, I mean, it's been one crazy journey, and thanks for taking us along for the ride. I think a lot of people appreciate it. You so you recorded Halamonte. Did you record that Rancho de la Luna? Is that correct?
I did.
And
Yeah.
you were, listening to this album, as you were riding your motorcycle or your car back and forth. What was that whole experience like? What was it like recording there? What were you driving? Because I always love hearing about motorcycles and cars. If you feel like entertaining us with that, but what was that whole situation like? Did you really enjoy being in the studio for your solo record?
Well, I did. I was painting houses, and I quit my day job, and I took a royalty check from Caius, and I booked 5 days at Rancho de Luna, and I took a week to woodshed in my apartment and arranged all the songs, and then I went up there in my '65 Chevy Impala, and I dropped all the drum tracks the first night, and then did all the guitars and bass the next 2 days, and then mixed it on the fourth and fifth day. I think it was the fourth day. And Tony Mason engineered it. It was his first record. He was the underling of Fred Drake. Fred Drake was kind of like his mentor, and so he was groomed to kind of take over the studio. And Fred was ill then too, so he wasn't as active. And so Tony, it was my first solo record. It was Tony's first record as engineer, and yeah, we did the whole thing in I think 4 or 5 days. And I left. I had a pair of home speakers in my back seat of my Impala, some Pioneer speakers, and I blew them out on the freeway on the way home. And yeah, that was it. It was fun.
It sounds great. That sounds like the life out there. I mean, there's been so many things about Rancho de la Luna and it being like, a magical place, the Muscle Shoals of, the desert rock scene. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's pretty awesome.
um, so kind of going on to your next, few albums, but particularly I want to talk about Jacuzzi, because you shelved this album for a bit and then came back to it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was 2010. I had just got off the road, and I was um, getting ready to record a new record um, at what would end up being my wife's. It was her house out in Joshua Tree. And I set up a studio in her house with Tony Mason. And I started recording a new record. And about 4 days into it, I had an entirely, I had like a 180 situation where I just said, you know what, stop the tape. I said, Tony, just give me 20 minutes. I'll be right back. And I came back in. I said, just roll tape and forget everything that we've done the last 4 days. And what I love about Tony is we work very well together. We have for many years. We've made lots of recordings together, and we trust each other. And we both have a pretty fearless attitude when it comes to recording. And so I came back 20 minutes later, and he rolled tape, and I just started improvising music um, for the next few days, and that was Jacuzzi. It was just something that was super spontaneous, and I felt this like it just had to happen. And so I recorded all the music that would, compile to be the Jacuzzi release. And I put both records, the record that I was recording prior and the Jacuzzi record, I put all the music on the shelf. Um, and it was not long after that John Garcia called me and wanted to talk about getting the band back together. And so that's kind of why that stuff sat on the shelf for as long as it did. Well, I never even released the first record, which I still have, which I think I might release at some point.
Oh, shit. All right. Hell yeah. uh well, kind of going from there. I mean, that was really cool, by the way, that your wife let you set up, or your soon to be wife let you set up a recording studio in her place. So, props to her for that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your current lineup for the Brant Bjork Trio. So, Mario Laley, which you talked about. You've been with Fatso Jetson. He's meant so much to you in the scene. Like, what is this guy's bio? How would you explain to people like outside of the scene? And like, what does he mean to you? And like, what causes your guys' longevity as friends?
Well, he was just kind of, I mean, he was introduced to me. He wasn't there, but as a person, I was told Mario Lally is the godfather of punk rock in the desert. And that would have been like 1984. So that gives you an idea of how long Mario Lally has been seen as a spearhead in the DIY movement here in the desert. Um, there's um, you have guys that whether it's Ian Mackay from Minor Threat or Greg and Chuck from Black Flag. You have people that are just kind of, they take it upon themselves to be the ones that you know make things happen. And Boomer, as we call him, he was the one that was super proactive, and he's had great bands. He's a great musician. He was always forward thinking. He was innovative, musically fearless. He invested in a generator. He would throw parties. He just loves music, and he loves the community that we we built, and so he's just looked at as a he's like our Santa Claus, you know, our Jerry Garcia. You know, we just all love him, and we love what he's done for us. And he's kind of a leader, you know, and the leader of the people. You know, it's always those are always the real leaders, are the ones who actually don't want to be the leader, but the people um, kind of view them as the lead, follow them, and wait for their move. And you know, Boomer's been a kind of mentor for me since I mean, I played one of my first proper gigs. 13 years old, was opening up for Boomer's band, and I went to his Chihuahua house in La Quinta when I was 13, and he recorded my band, and you know, and I would go, you know, go see Yawning Man every weekend, and I just looked up to him, and he was, like I said, he was just kind of a mentor. And then as we got older, we became more friends, and you know, worked together, and um, almost like colleagues now and stuff. And so, you know, it was time to put a band together, and Boomer was, and him and I were managing Stoner, and we spent a lot of hours on the road together, and we love working together, and we've always loved playing music together. And so when it came time to put a new solo band together, you know, he was just like, "Oh well, shit, man, if you need a bass player," I said, "Well, I mean, that's a no brainer." And then we just kind of mockingly call it the Brant Bjork Trio because we love jazz. So
There you go. So kind of speaking of Stoner, you also play with Ryan Goot. I hope I'm saying that last name correct.
that's correct. Goot, yeah, Goot's been playing drums with me for a while now. I'm losing count, but it's we're probably going on 8 9 years. So
You pick him.
yeah, he's a good guy, and he's a great drummer, and you know, once again, we just we get along, and so we get it on, you know.
I mean, as a drummer yourself, I mean, like, what do you? I guess it's more anything. You kind of just seem like you like to work with people that you vibe with, because that's probably more what your music means to you than anything else. But how do you what do you look for in a good drummer? What's something that you liked about him? If you can kind of name anything, or talk about Ryan.
Well, I have a friend that I've known for years, um, named Trevor whatever, and he worked in L.A. and a prominent studio there, and was rubbing shoulders with a lot of musicians. And I called him up, somewhat frustrated, and I said, "Dude, I need a drummer, and I need a drummer that can swing. I said, if you know a guy that has jazz chops, I'll take a jazz drummer and I'll teach him how to rock, because I'm learning that it's very difficult to take a rock drummer and teach him how to swing." And he said, "I know a kid who's jazz trained, and he's really cool. I've done some sessions with him." And so I got his number, and he came out to my studio in Joshua Tree, and that was Ryan Goot. And I set up, and he set up, and we jammed. And for about the first 20 minutes, I was like, "Yeah, he can swing." And I said, "Awesome." And I said, "You want to do this?" He said, "Sure." And I told him, I'm going to, you know, you're a great drummer, and you've got chops, and you know how to swing, and you're jazz trained. And I'm give me like 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to get you rocking. And that's what we did.
There you go. What an origin story for that. He fell in the right place, right time for him. Um,
Yeah.
Kind of go on to some other people you worked with, longtime friend of yours, of course. I mean, you guys were childhood friends, but Nick Oliveri. And he played with Mondo Generator and a bunch of other bands with him, Caius included. You guys seem so. I mean, I've never met Nick, but Michael here has. But you guys seem so maybe different ends of the spectrum. I just got to ask, what is the trick to your long lasting friendship? What do you guys vibe about? Um, if anything that comes to mind, like what do you What do you have to say nice about Nick?
Well, the Nick Oliveri and Brant Bjork story is really funny, and it's rooted in a lot of irony. And funny is a key word there because Nick and I just we love to laugh and we share a sense of humor that goes back to us being kids. Um, I did grow up with Nick. Um, in a lot of ways, I kind of, you know, Nick and I played Little League Baseball together. That tells you how long we've known each other. Um, and the irony being is that I was kind of this little kid punk rocker, and Nick was, I think he's a year or two older than me. He was like a heavy metal kid. And then in the mid 80s, punk and metal started to kind of blend. And Nick was starting to get turned on through a punk rock girlfriend to bands like The Damned and the Ramones and Black Flag. And I was through older friends and older kids and other bands. I was discovering bands like Motorhead and Metallica and Slayer, and stuff like this. And we kind of started to become friends. And when it came time to start a band, which would become Caius, uh, Chris Cockrell and I, who we were best friends at the time, we found out that Nick was selling a bass guitar. So we went over to his house and we said, "We're interested in buying your bass guitar." And he sold it to us and asked us what we were doing. He said, "We're starting a band." That's kind of how it all started. And we were just young kids in the middle of the desert, um, listening to the same music, uh, bored, frustrated, and like wanting to do something with ourselves. And and we ended up doing that, and we're just still friends. I think Nick and I are just. I think we're both able to look at where we were when we were kids and where we're at now and go like, God, what a freaking trip, man. Like this is just really bizarre. And we just always have a laugh about it. And but obviously we are very opposite in a lot of respects, but we love music. We just have a passion for music, and and we just love each other.
Simple as that. That makes sense. What's so you started a record label, El Camino Records, and which later became Duna Records. Can you discuss like kind of going into that and like what were the challenges of starting a label? Why did you start a label? And how that kind of impacted your career going forward from that point?
Well, starting a label was something that I wanted to do as far back as Caius. I was grateful for the opportunity to be in a band that got signed when we were that age, um, at that particular time. But I was even then able to see the confinement of being on a particular record label. And I used to argue with the guys in Caius, like, "Hey, man, we've got nothing but time on our side because we're so young. I think we can go about doing things an entirely different way." And that way would be like our way. Um, they didn't necessarily see it like that. They had different ambitions, and so that eventually resulted in me leaving the band and the band ultimately dissolving. But I never let go of my ultimate dream of being totally independent and doing things, you know, the way I saw them in my vision. And my first attempt at that was in 1995 with Decon was a hardcore punk band I was playing in at the time, and then Chris Cockrell's band Solar Feast, and so I started El Camino Records, and we put out a couple CDs, and it was a learning curve. And but I loved the adventure of it. And then I eventually joined Fu Manchu. And then after Fu Manchu, when it was time to embark on my solo career, I was recording records for Frank Kozik, and I loved that because Frank had the independent label of Man's Ruin, and there was a freedom and there was a power in that freedom, and I recognized that, and I loved it. And then after Man's Ruin folded, and I needed to kind of start from scratch as a solo artist, having left Fu Manchu and not having a home for my records, there was a no-brainer. I was like, I'm going to start a label again, and so I started Duna. And then my original partner, Denise DeVito, and I parted ways. And Duna was put on the shelf, and I moved to Europe. And then my good friend Kale said, "Why don't you come back and let's start up another label called Low Desert Punk?" And so that's what I did. And then Kale and I parted ways, and that's when I started to embark on the Caius Lives adventure. And then after that, I ended up signing a deal with Napalm in Austria, and then I signed a deal with Gabe at Heavy Psych in Italy, and it was great. And those were great situations for me because I was now married with kids, and I didn't have the time to be dedicating to a record label. But just this last year, um, I'm seeing that I've fulfilled my contractual obligations, and I feel like I do have the time now, and so I think I might um, relaunch Duna again. So that's what I'm planning on doing.
Oh yeah, you heard it here first or second or whatever you said it. Um, that's freaking rad, and it seems like this idea of you doing music was always just like this evolving thing of like what adventure can I get into, rather than like how do I make the most money out of this, but just like which seems like a good way to go about it. We do lots of interviews with lots of different types of people, so your journey is unique and people love following it, and it's a very storied history. I have a somewhat of a big question, or what I see as big. We like to ask people how they get through. At the end of every episode, we like to ask people how they get through when they're feeling like imposter syndrome, or how they maybe feel like they're not stacking up, or when they just feel like they're down and out. In interviews that I've heard with you, you talked about kind of facing a period of depression post leaving Caius, and for the reasons that you've mentioned earlier in this interview. And you went to Santa Cruz, which both Michael and I lived in for 7 years. And you mentioned kind of the process of reinventing yourself. Um, and just what is something that kind of comes to mind when you think of that time period? What does it kind of mean to like take that that idea and that step into finding something more out of your life and continuing with music and finding your path in life?
Well, life's a bitch, isn't it? And it's not it's not fair either. Um, but um, I think it is healthy to get in the habit of recognizing your blessings. So that's a good start. And I saw a quote the other day that I thought was pretty rad. It just said, um, "Life doesn't happen to you; it happens for you." And as I get older, just try to recognize that, you know, all situations are necessary. Um, we as a species evolve because of struggle, not because everything is harmonious and kosher. Um, and struggle sucks. But you know, a hurricane just blew through my neighborhood 48 hours ago, and it damaged a lot of people's homes, and a lot of people are really in dire straits right now and suffering. I lucked out. I'm grateful for that, and it's like there's not a cloud in the sky right now. It's gorgeous. Things come and go, and when things are tough and rough, you just got to hang on. And something, I've been through a lot of hell in my years as a musician in the music industry. And as if you've been in the music industry as long as I have, you can bet your butt you're gonna you're gonna go through some hard times. Um, and life in general. Um, but I just, like I said, I just think of how lucky I am to have the ability to even, you know, be an artist and living the lifestyle I choose to live.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm
So count
pretty
your blessings.
stoked. Say again.
Count your blessings. That's,
Yeah,
more or
you
less.
know, yeah, exactly. So
Well, yeah, it's a lot to think about, and thank you so much for doing this. There's so many people out there. We reached out on Reddit and asked for questions from people, and they gave us so many. There's so many people that really appreciate you doing what you do. Kind of just like rolling out, the carpet for you to say whatever you want. We are going to be seeing you at Desert Fest, September 16th, Saturday, September 16th. Very excited about that. Hopefully we can cheers you with a beer or something like that. But is there anything else that you want to mention to the folks this is going out to?
well, I appreciate all the appreciation, throughout the years, and uh, you know, I am a bit of a selfish artist, but I I do recognize that it takes two to tango. So I very much appreciate all those people who appreciate me, and we'll just keep dancing.
There you go. Well, this has been the Zen Perry Project with Brant Bjork. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to do this. It's been super fun. Cannot wait to see
Thank
you in
you.
the city. Thank you so much, Brant. I love you, man.
I love you too, man.
All right. Hey, you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
All right. See you.